The boardroom smelled like fresh coffee and old money, and when my mother looked at me across that long oak table, the first thing she said was, "You were never supposed to be here." Not hello. Not even a glance at the chair beside her. Just that, delivered in the same tone she used to send back wine at restaurants. "My name is Nadia Okafor-Wells. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed structural engineer with the City of Toronto, and I have spent the last 6 years building bridges, literally, while my family spent that same time building a case for why I didn't deserve to exist in their world." That morning in the boardroom, I was there because my father had died 3 weeks earlier, and because his will had named me as a co-inheritor of the family property development company he'd built from nothing in Mississauga. A company my mother and my older brother had been running without me. A company I hadn't even known existed in its current form until a lawyer called my cell phone on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing load calculations for a pedestrian overpass on Eglinton. I should back up. My father came to Canada from Nigeria in 1987 with $40 and an engineering degree that took him 3 extra years to get recognized here. He worked construction, then inspection, then planning, then slowly, carefully, began acquiring small commercial properties in Peel region when nobody else thought they were worth anything. By the time I was born, he was doing well. By the time I was 10, he was doing very well, but you'd never have known it from looking at him. He drove a '98 Civic until it wouldn't start anymore. He brought his lunch to the office in a blue thermos every single day. My mother was different. She had grown up in Oakville in a house with a circular driveway and a cleaning service that came twice a week. When she married my father, her parents didn't come to the wedding. She never talked about that directly, but it shaped everything. The way she dressed, the way she entertained, the way she treated anyone who she thought made her look lesser than she wanted to appear. My brother is 7 years older than me. He is smooth in the way certain men are smooth, like something with all the rough edges sanded off until there's nothing left to grip. He went to Ivy Business School. He plays golf at a club in Oakville that costs more per year than most people's rent. He married a woman who coordinates charity galas and refers to catering choices as a form of storytelling. I became an engineer. I wore steel-toed boots to work. I had a hard hat with my name stenciled on it in reflective tape. At my mother's dinner parties, I was introduced as our other one, with a pause before the noun that did a lot of heavy lifting. The first time I understood how little I mattered to them, I was 22. I was finishing my last semester at Ryerson when I called home to say I'd been offered a co-op placement with an infrastructure firm downtown. A real placement, competitive, the kind that led to jobs. My mother's response was, "That's nice. Your brother just closed on his first condo investment. Did he tell you?" He had not told me. I had not been invited to the celebration dinner either, which I discovered later from a photo my aunt texted me by accident. I didn't cry that night. I went to the campus Tim Hortons and sat alone with a double-double and a breakfast sandwich at 8 in the evening, watching the streetcar go by in the rain. The woman behind the counter said, "Long day?" And I said yes, and that was the kindest thing anyone said to me for the rest of the week. I built a life after that. Slowly, deliberately, the way you build anything structural, foundation first, then frame, then everything else. I passed my PNG exams on the first try. I got hired by the firm. I moved into a bachelor apartment in Leslieville that was small enough that I could stand in the middle and touch both walls if I stretched, and I was proud of it. I made friends at work, real ones, the kind who show up with coffee when your project gets delayed and don't expect anything in return. My father used to call me on Sunday mornings. That was our thing. He didn't call my brother on Sunday mornings, or if he did, I didn't know about it. He'd ask about the projects I was working on and actually listen to the answers. Once I spent 20 minutes explaining the load distribution principles in a particular bridge design, and when I finished there was a pause and he said, "You know, when I was doing inspections, I always wanted to understand that part better." It wasn't much, but it was something. My mother never called on Sundays, or any other day unless she needed something. The worst Christmas was the year I'd just been promoted to senior engineer. I was 27. I drove to the family home in Mississauga with a bottle of Riesling from a winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake and a sweater I'd spent too long picking out for my mother. When I walked in, my brother and his wife were already there, and the table was set for four. 4 chairs! I counted. I stood in the doorway holding my wine and my bag, and my mother looked at me and said, "Oh, I thought you said you weren't coming." I had not said that. She added a chair from the den. It was a different height than the others and wobbled slightly. I sat in it for 3 hours and spoke maybe 40 words. On the drive home, somewhere on the 427, I pulled off at a rest stop and sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time. I didn't cry then either. I had learned not to. But something in me went very still and very cold, and I think I made a decision in that parking lot that I didn't fully understand until years later. I decided that I would stop waiting for them to make room. I would build my own table. My father got sick in the fall of my 30th year, pancreatic cancer, which is the kind that doesn't announce itself politely. By the time they found it, it had already been somewhere it shouldn't have been for a while. The prognosis was not good. My brother called me, not my mother, my brother, and said, "Dad's ill. Mom needs people around, not, we need you, not, Dad's asking for you." Just that. Mom needs people around, as though I was a category, not a person. I took a week off work. I drove to Mississauga. I let myself into the house with the key I'd always kept, even when there was no particular reason to keep it, and my mother was sitting in the living room with a cup of tea watching a home renovation show at full volume. She turned to look at me when I came in. "Your room is made up," she said, then turned back to the television. My father was upstairs. He looked smaller than I remembered. People do when they're sick. They shrink toward the center of themselves. I sat beside his bed and he turned his head and his eyes focused and he said, "Nadia." Just my name. But the way he said it, I stayed for 2 weeks. Then I went back to Toronto and came back every weekend. I drove the 403 on Friday evenings in traffic that would make a person lose faith in urban planning entirely, and I was there every Saturday and Sunday. My brother came twice. Both times he had somewhere to be by early afternoon. My mother tolerated my presence the way you tolerate a noise from an appliance you don't know how to fix. She didn't thank me. She didn't ask me to stay longer. Once, when I was changing the dressing on a wound on my father's arm, something I'd learned from a nurse at the hospital who showed me twice because she could see I was the one who'd actually be doing it, my mother walked in on a phone call with her friend and said, loudly enough, "She's always hovering. It's unsettling." My father heard. I saw his jaw tighten. He died on a Sunday in November, which felt appropriate somehow. I was holding his hand. My brother wasn't there. My mother was downstairs. It was just me and him and the sound of the furnace and the gray light coming through the curtains. And at the end, just before, he squeezed my hand once. Firm, deliberate. The way you grip something you want to remember. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received a registered letter from a law firm in downtown Toronto. My brother had filed a challenge to our father's will. The will, it turned out, had named me as co-inheritor of the family company. 40% of the shares, along with a trust structured for my long-term benefit. My mother received her portion separately, through a spousal arrangement my father had set up years prior. My brother had expected to receive the company outright. He had not. The letter from his lawyers was 12 pages long. It alleged that I had exerted undue influence over my father during his illness. It alleged emotional manipulation. It suggested that my involvement in his care had been strategically motivated. It requested the court set aside the bequest to me entirely. I sat with that letter on my kitchen table in Leslieville for a long time. Outside, a streetcar went by. Upstairs, my neighbor was playing guitar badly. The radiator was making the sound it always made. Everything was exactly normal, and I was sitting there holding 12 pages that said I had taken advantage of a dying man who was my father. I did not sleep that night. I called a colleague the next morning, a woman I'd worked with on a highway rehabilitation project in Brampton, someone whose judgment I trusted more than almost anyone I knew. She had gone through a property dispute with her own family 2 years earlier. She listened to me for 45 minutes without interrupting, and then she said, "You need a litigator who does estates, and you need them this week." She texted me a name before we even hung up. The lawyer's name was Genevieve Tran. Her office was on King Street West, third floor, with a view of construction scaffolding on all sides, which I found oddly comforting. She was 50-something, direct in the way that people are when they've stopped having patience for anything else, and she listened to my entire account without writing a single thing down. When I finished, she folded her hands on her desk and said, "They made an error." "What kind?" I asked. "The kind where they assumed you'd be too exhausted to fight." She took the case. "The weeks before the hearing were the kind that strip everything down to what's actually essential." I went through every text, every email, every Sunday phone call I'd saved without meaning to save. I pulled my work calendar, every Friday drive, every weekend visit, logged because I'd had to arrange coverage at the office. I found receipts from the pharmacy in Mississauga for my father's prescriptions, paid on my credit card because sometimes no one else had been there to do it. Evidence, Genevieve said, is just truth organized so other people can follow it. Then one evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it. It was my father's longtime business partner, a man named Earl who had been in construction in the GTA for longer than I'd been alive, who had known my father since the early 90s, who had been at my parents' wedding and at mine when I didn't even know it. He said, "Nadia, I'm sorry I haven't called sooner. I should have. I want you to know that I have something your father gave me 2 years ago. He asked me to hold it until it was needed. I think it's needed now." My throat closed. I asked him what it was. "A letter," he said, "and some documents." He was very clear about what they were for. I drove to Earl's house in Brampton on a Wednesday evening after work, still in my sight clothes, hard hat on the back seat. He met me at the door and handed me a sealed envelope, my father's handwriting on the front, my name. I didn't open it in my car. I drove to the Lake Ontario, the waterfront in Port Credit, parked where I could see the water, and I sat there and opened it. It was 3 pages, handwritten, which anyone who knew my father would tell you was extraordinary, because he typed everything, always had, said his handwriting embarrassed him. But this was handwritten, in his careful block letters, and it began, "Nadia, I have not been good at saying things out loud. This is my attempt to fix that on paper. I won't share all of it. Some of it belongs only to me." But he wrote about the Sunday phone calls. He wrote that he had listened to every word of every conversation we'd ever had, and that he knew I thought they were small things, but they were not small to him. He wrote that he had watched me become a person of genuine substance, and that he had not found the language in time, and that he was sorry for that. He wrote that the company had been built for both his children, but that he knew, clearly and without doubt, that only one of them had ever understood what it had cost him to build it. He did not say my brother's name in that letter. He didn't need to. He wrote, "I've been proud of you in ways I never knew how to make visible. I am making them visible now." The court date was a gray Tuesday in March. I wore a blazer I'd bought at a consignment shop on Queen Street West. Charcoal gray, structured, exactly right. I arrived early. Genevieve was already there, coffee in hand, reviewing notes with the calm of someone who had done this many times and intended to do it many more. My mother sat on the opposite side of the room with my brother. She was wearing her good pearls. She didn't look at me when I entered. My brother looked at me and then looked away, and I saw something in that half second. Not guilt, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Like the moment before a structure fails when everything looks fine, but the stress is already distributed wrong. My brother's lawyer was a man named Aldous Peck, silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of composure that comes from charging $400 an hour. He opened by describing me as someone who had isolated my father from his family during his illness, who had used my nursing role, his words, nursing role, for an engineer with a Ph.D. to influence a vulnerable man. He presented a family photo from 3 Christmases ago in which I was not present as evidence of estrangement. He did not mention why I wasn't in that photo. He did not mention the wobbling chair from the den. He presented a photo of me helping my father with his medication, with a caption suggesting I was administering treatment without medical authorization. It was a Tuesday evening. My father had asked me to hand him his prescription bottle, which I did. The photo had been taken from a doorway by someone I could not see. When Genevieve rose, she did not perform. That's the thing I remember most. She simply began presenting information. She submitted my credit card statements showing pharmacy purchases across 14 months. She submitted my work calendar, cross-referenced with my Friday departures. She submitted the testimony of the home care nurse who had been coming on Wednesdays and who confirmed, plainly, that the consistent daily care had been provided by me and not by any other family member. And then she submitted my father's letter. Aldous objected. The judge, a woman 50s, reading glasses on a chain, looked at him over those glasses and said, "I'll determine relevance. Proceed." The letter was read. My father's careful block letters entered the official record of Ontario's court system. The room was very quiet. Then Earl was called to testify. He walked in with the deliberateness of a man who has nothing to prove and nothing to lose. He stated that he had known my father for 31 years, that he had been his business partner and his friend, and that 2 years before his death, my father had asked him to hold a sealed package of documents related to the company's long-term plan. Those documents, submitted to the court, included a signed letter of direction regarding the company shares, predating my father's illness by 8 months, predating any accusation of influence by a wide margin. There was also a recording. It had been made on a device my father kept in his home office, which he'd used for decades to record notes to himself when he was working late. Earl had found it in the package, 6 minutes long. My father's voice, clear, unhurried, stating the date, stating his intentions, stating that the distribution of his estate was his own decision made in full awareness, and that his daughter Nadia had not asked him for anything except to let her sit beside him while he was sick. He said, "She came every weekend. Nobody asked her to. She just came." When the judge ruled, she was efficient about it. She found no evidence of undue influence. She upheld the will in full. She noted, with a brevity that carried considerable weight, that the evidence of my involvement in my father's care was not evidence of manipulation. It was evidence of presence. And presence, she said, should not require an apology. My brother didn't look at me when she finished. My mother gathered her coat and her bag and walked out without pausing. I stood at the table for a moment after most people had left, just breathing. Genevieve put a hand briefly on my arm. "You ready?" I told her I needed a minute. I sat in that courtroom for a few minutes alone. The overhead lights hummed. The table was cleared. Outside the windows, you could hear the city going about its ordinary business, the way it always does, regardless of what happens in any given room. My father's letter was in my bag. A copy of it, anyway. I had the original at home, on my kitchen table, weighted down with a river stone I'd picked up years ago on a camping trip in Algonquin with 2 friends from university. The kind of trip I'd planned myself, bought the gear for with a birthday check I'd cashed at a Scotiabank on Yonge Street, driven myself to in a Civic I'd maintained carefully because I couldn't afford to have it break down. I thought about the Sunday phone calls. I thought about every one of them and how I had saved them. Not intentionally, not strategically. I had just never been able to delete them. There were 47 of them in my phone. I'd counted once. That night, I didn't go out to celebrate. I ordered Thai food from the place on Gerrard that I'd been going to for 6 years, the one where the owner's daughter knew my usual without asking. I sat on my floor with the food and a glass of water and let the quiet sit with me. My brother texted 3 days later. The message was exactly 8 words. "I think we should talk. For the family." I read it twice. I thought about the wobbling chair. I thought about the Christmas photo with 4 settings. I thought about my mother on the phone saying she's always hovering while my father lay in the next room trying not to hear it. I typed back, "I need some time," which was true. And then I put my phone face down on the counter and made tea. The company required decisions. I worked with Earl and with the estate lawyers over the following months to understand what I'd actually inherited, not just the percentage but the meaning of it. It was, in fact, a meaningful company. My father had built something real, There were properties in Brampton, Mississauga, and one parcel in Guelph he'd held onto for 17 years waiting for the right moment. There were long-term tenants who had been there since the beginning, who had sent flowers to the funeral. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it yet. I was still an engineer. I still had projects and colleagues and a hard hat with my name on it. But I started going through the files on Saturday mornings at a desk I'd set up in the second bedroom of the larger apartment I'd moved into in the Danforth neighborhood. The files smelled like cedar and old paper. Sometimes I'd find a note in my father's handwriting in the margins. A calculation, an observation, a question mark beside a number he'd clearly wanted to revisit. I started to understand him differently in those margins. Not completely, not without the grief still edging everything, but differently. One Saturday in April, I found a folder at the back of a drawer, unlabeled, held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle. Inside was a printout of an article about a pedestrian bridge that had been built in Brampton in 2019, the bridge I had worked on as a junior engineer. My name was not in the article, but the firm's name was, and the project description was exact. The printout was folded in thirds, worn at the creases, the way paper gets when it's been taken out and put back a number of times. He had found it himself. He had kept it. I sat at that desk for a long time with that piece of paper in my hands. Outside, the Danforth was doing what it does on April Saturdays. People with dogs, kids on bikes, somebody somewhere playing music from a window. The light was coming in at a low angle. The radiator was making it sound. I didn't cry then, exactly, but something settled, some weight that I had been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing it was there, like a load redistributed correctly, like a structure finally balanced. My father did not say the things he needed to say while he was alive, and I will carry that for a long time, but he said them. Eventually, he found a way to say them, and they reached me, and that is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. I planted a red maple sapling in the backyard of the Mississauga house that spring, my house now, at least partly, by law and by love. My father had always wanted one. He'd mentioned it once, years ago, on a Sunday call, said the yard needed something with real color in October. I don't know if he ever got around to looking into it, but I found the right tree, drove it out there in the back of a borrowed pickup, and put it in the ground in the corner of the yard that gets the most afternoon light. It's a small thing. I know it's a small thing. But he built everything he ever built, from small things, one at a time, carefully, without much applause. I think he would have understood.